Kurt looked at Zimmer and said, "Yo, I thought of something that reminds me of how problems expand." Yippleist explanations of how the Yippleverse expands left pivots unslaptified. Consider instead the infinite expansion of the dough of the cookieverse, Zimmer growled. No wonder, Zimmer, this is an analogy for edification. Scientists run experiments at cosmological scale and quantum ingredient size to determine that the dough space of the cookieverse is expanding. What is more is that the cookieverse isn't unique. It's just one of an infinite number of cookies cut out and baked from a singularity on a cookie sheet that inflated faster than light for a fraction of a second, relatively speaking. When the expansion stopped, each cookie had its own special moment, baked itself with a big bang, and its own fine temperature, randomly selected cookie law constants to become a cookie in time, with thermodynamics bringing it to consume itself and gradually be digested, in some instances by sentient beings evolved within the cookie. Each cookieverse, if it had sentient products, evolving from its special constant physical values selected by random chance from a nearly infinite number of variables, modeling cookie recipes, is simpler with an infinite number of variables, and with constants, being just nominal selection of ingredient baking temperatures and times. It would find its sentience consuming the cookie itself. Sentience within a cookieverse would learn that the constants of the cookie that are baked in might have been very different indeed. Instead of gravity having the value of coconuts, it might have been sugar sprinkles. Instead of various quantum values of vanilla, it might have been chocolate or peppermint, etc. The most informative and marvelous discovery of cookie baker mathematician scientists for themselves might have been the discovery that besides eternal inflation of cookie dough and infinite cookieverses, each cookieverse dough from a cookie sheet branch would expand in an infinite number of directions in what could be modeled with infinite dimensions of Hilbert space. Gauss Hilbert was one of the greatest of cookie baking theorists of all time. He consulted with Albert Einstein concerning the nature of cookie dough in the general and special theories of cookie dough. Cookie dough was determined to stretch or collapse under the influence of dark matter, a very special ingredient, as opposed to dark energy that it can expand space, time again within a baked cookie. Evidently, cookie dough space can reappear within baked cookies as cookieverses remain within the eternal realm of the great cookie hosting all cookieverses. Our cookieverse was discovered to have resumed expanding about 250 years ago, and may accelerate until it no longer can be said to exist, amusingly after the cookieverse has consumed itself with thermodynamics. There seems to be a self-cleaning oven implicitly contained within the space dough. The great cookieverse is comparable to an infinite fractal that can create infinite branches and cookie sheets within itself in infinite dimensions, with the signal difference that all of its cookies are variable constants. For there seem to be nothing constant except values of expansive space dough and mathematical forms representing cookieverse values, the latter being constant in the sense that they are always subject to change in the Parmenidean sense of water flowing under the bridge, always changing, though the river never changes, as well as the opposite viewpoint of Heraclitus, that one can never step into the same river twice because it is always changing. What is in motion stays in motion except for the object itself, because it is only moving in relation to other objects that aren't, or that are moving at a different speed. The great cookie kernel is a tree of life, so marvelous, and may occupy no more actual space than a singularity. It could possibly be an idea in the thought of the great cookie baker, with hyperdimensional variable fractals requiring no space to exist in whatsoever. With their feet converting to numbers, Laura said, "This mission to recover the patents of the dwindling worlds has become somewhat ethereal even for me, Victor. The Forensics Accounting Office encounters a wide variety of structures, tax shelters, thefts, and relocation of resources. Yet the trans-universal infinities of universes leave me somewhat baffled concerning direction. Let's say a prayer before we proceed." "All right with me, Laura," Victor said, taking a knee. "What prayer would you like?" Joining Victor and taking a knee, she replied, "The universe farer's prayer." They prayed together. "Jesus, Savior, pilot me across the multiverse's troubled seas, extra dimensions ahead, infinite universes behind. Lead me beyond omegas and unstable temporal non-primes." They rose from the ground and began skatewalking over the surface topology, tapping into the molecular composition of the structure for information as they went. If numbers are fractions of a whole or have meaning only in relation to a series of numbers, infinities as it were in all directions except as arbitrary sets or delimiting paradigms, Laura, Why are numbers not infinite in quantity and size in every position in each dimension without any sort of delimiting structure at all? How can transfinite series, as Gregory Cantor discovered, have any real or unique identity that would make them greater or lesser than every number that exists is an infinite continuum for all possible dimensions? Victor, I would guess you wonder that, because if numbers are the true foundation of all energy and mass, and gravity exists as well as thermodynamics in each universe, then obviously there is a process for changing sets that exist within the continuum of all possible numbers at every possible location. Why would numbers develop temporarily finite sets like squalls across an infinite sea? Are they echoes from the passage of an idea from the deity? Why do numbers draw other positions together within a continuum that has infinite numbers at every location? What makes for an increase or decrease of value anywhere if any place may as well be nowhere? Why would a spatial field, perhaps a field of charged virtual particles, upsurge like a hernia, driving apart space-time, and appear within fields of a universe as elements with cardinal or ordinal differentiation in no space? The quantity is infinite at every location, so the relative scalar difference of magnitude causality could be explained with dimensional intrusions. Yes, you are right in saying that, Laura. I wonder why 7 causes of gravity exist at all, and why gravity exists if numbers are not an intrusive upsurge into being in no space. Well, numbers do exist, Victor. Just look at our feet. Inequalities pervade the universe of mass energy, and they are the machine that, in a sense, circulates existence through revolutions of thermodynamic ordered change. A greater always seems to transcend a pre-existing series. God is said to have issued his word, possibly raising waves of change through infinities like points of space, bringing time into motion through displacement of dimensional nothingness. I've wondered what factor would set the values of the numbers of dimensions existing at one point, or if the value is always set to infinity. I believe presently we should look for data about the form of the structure. Obviously, we cannot regard other universes as being on the same metric as ours. Since universal space-time is self-standing in relation to the thermodynamic spaces and configurations for themselves and not for other universes, thought might occur at some future or past time. New inventions created a priori to resolve circumstances that don't exist yet and may keep our universe and the sentience in it alive. Humans may have a future instead of being haplessly rolled up by whatever concern crashes into it or drops in from higher dimensions. Laura, I've wondered about the relations simultaneous event in different universes, or if there is even such a thing. The life of a universe is like that of a campfire that may start with a small combustion event and burn up its wood supply until it finally is a thermodynamic spent pile of ashes. The past and future of the campfire don't actually exist. Only the present state of the campfire exists. If our universe is 13.2 billion years old, then the universe fire has burned that long, yet it is always in the present, and the past is lost, except as Shannon entropy conserved data someplace. If an event occurs in our universe, for example, the Last Judgment that may occur circa 3400 Anno Domini, based on my readings of the Revelation chapters 19-21, then that event could occur simultaneously with the present state of other universes existing on that day. Universes that exist and conclude before or after the 13.2 billion year window of the theoretical life of this universe could not exist concurrently and experience any awareness of the Last Judgment event presently through interdimensional relocator technology as a simultaneous event. Just the present live state of universes exist, some before and some after those of the original human universe, though line cone images of them may be observed for trillions of years, theoretically. General and special relativity theories complicate circulations of the relations of interuniversal space-time positions. They are too much for me at any rate. I'm thankful that entangled energies universes are not in uncollapsed form at all possible locations of extra spatial infinity and eternity. Laura said, we will advance all of those inventions and grant patents that become non-exclusive after 3 years with 10% royalties to patent holders in perpetuity. That is the best available way to keep new ideas in production and from being buried under exclusivity and suppression from manipulators and censors of the marketplace of ideas. As the pair neared the space relocator they had fabricated remotely, they discovered aspects of the power of the planet-sized quantum computer. It began collapsing waveforms of infinite numbers around them. Long ago, the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics developed a Schrödinger wave function collapse paradigm that became surpassed by the more accurate Everett many worlds paradigm. In the Everett account, the wave function never collapsed. Instead, a new reality was branched to instead of a waveform collapse. The Everett paradigm might be compared to that of a metaverse existing for God with every possible universe differentiation, even by a single quark actually existing. That was quite a different scenario from the venerable Copenhagen interpretation, with the quantum particle at all possible locations reduced to just a single place when observed, with the collapse of the wave function, a grounding of the infinite light of locations and velocity of a single particle. A wave is collapsed to a particular point. For me at least, finite zero-dimension points of phenomenality among uncollapsed natural infinities is a paradox. Victor said, "Let us yield a little time for the relocator vessel to recognize us and merge its being for itself with our mind fields in themselves and for others." Sure, Victor, consider this. Logically, according to some multiverse theories, there may be an infinite number of occurrences of everything possible in every possible universe. Perhaps the Schrödinger wave function requires transuniversal realizations of every possible element of every possible universe, manufacturing them, as it were, in every possible time and stage of existence a priori. Instead of each sentient individual having a finite number of doppelgangers of himself within an infinite number of universes, everyone would have an infinite number of doppelgangers and various gradations of partial doppelgangers and universes with degrees of variation. That would, in the abstract, be like an infinite series multiplying itself infinitely at every point and infinitely from each point compounded. Besides possibly multiplying infinities and corresponding universes faster than infinite series can be logically increased, that may be a reason why God, if he chose to do so, may have limited the phenomena of being to just one universe that would be populated with human individuals. Though a computer program may generate infinite series naturally, it is simple for a programmer to curtail infinities for processing throughput. God may have infinite capability to contain all possible infinities and wave functions associated with them, yet choose to abbreviate them. As Alpha and Omega of all being, God foreknows all creation. Nothing mechanical concerning constructions of time or being are more than contingent being that he may decide to actualize for others. The actualization of all infinities for a metaverse may be abbreviated as a mathematician may abbreviate formulas instead of writing them all out. Universes may manifest phenomenally as needed to actualize logical continua and disappear when the time spotlight moves on. If there is an infinite quantity of every item in the mind of God actualized in his metaverse, then it may follow that some elements of his infinite qualities of perfection, varieties, quantities, and experiences of perfection present to and through sentient beings through infinite universes. Imperfections may be reciprocals of perfection, as night follows day and darkness yields unto dawn. Gradations of forms, events, persons, and things may be as necessary as the infinite numbers of fractions between whole numbers. God selects what forms or numbers he chooses to populate a universe with in order to design a universe that would accomplish his will. He may mask some of the fractions and permit selections that work within quantum value settings for the stabilized quantum fields in the design parameters, physical contents that is the infrastructure of the steady state of the macro-collapsed entangled material universe. Sure, the selections would be a factor of the predetermination of history. The ability to create more advanced sets with specially selected elements may be useful for fine-tuning the subjective experience and objective world for itself that contingent sentient minds experience. Maybe one of the reasons for doing so would be to build a character of sentience in a predetermined course of experience. Sentience is one of the ironic tones of imperfection for a monistic metaverse that fundamentally differentiates individual objects as perceptions of collapsed wave function object. Noteworthy because of differentiation from other collapsed wave function field differences around them. Sentience is finite and perfect and imperfect, phenomenal and temporal. Omniscience is perfect and above time. It is the one set of all sets of infinities in itself. Pluralism is a function or construction of definition by sentient beings within a monistic field for itself. God, though personifying the trinity of three persons in one, is the initial symmetry-breaking monistic plural sentience, omniscient before the existence of time. The fields of God that contain a metaverse are barely ponderable. Even a metaverse is challenging for sentience or AI to define contingent beings as we are. Victor said, well, Laura thought, one thing we may know, there could be an infinite number of hidden dimensions with criminal doppelgangers like those populating this one, trying to steal and own all of the intellectual capital in the metaverse. What if they're working together, synergizing their criminal powers? Indeed, Victor, what if there are an infinite number of anti-criminal doppelgangers working together to undo the imperial criminal empire's work? Victor replied, you know that Hegelian might speculate that God is trying to realize himself, or to realize perfect sentience by generating an infinite number of universes with infinite tools to actualize perfection. That is, to actualize perfection, every possibility may need to be made to exist as actuality, because anything less might be considered to be incomplete and imperfect. A Hegelian might, Laura answered, yet that implies God is imperfect and the metaverse was created in time and God with it. Then one encounters the problem of temporality and of an infinite universe existing in one direction in time rather than from eternity. A metaverse always imperfect and incomplete, cycling through a portion of non-space, eternally imperfect in one direction without generating sentience capable of comprehending it to own, delimit, or end it. The logic of the Trinity is more believable. No scientific idea is logically falsifiable with absolute certainty, Laura. The premises could always be in error. Then again, there's the problem of the criterion to consider. That is the Lao Tzu conundrum. A hummingbird flies into one's living room for a moment, then disappears. It is reasonable to speculate that it flew in through an open door or window. Then one is transformed by a gamer that one is informed by a gamer that one is in virtual reality and to get back to the task of winning. If the wave function explaining quantum particles wasn't falsifiable, some wouldn't regard it as valid physics. So if the criterion is correct concerning reality, a description of the quantum world when one isn't observing it, or alternatively when one is, may be an invalid question made from an ontologically wrong paradigm. Faith is a good way to relate to God for mortal humans, since nothing can be certain. Probabilities of outcomes may be made, of course, sometimes without very high likelihood of being a valid return on a proposition. Truth tables may be composed and made implicitly irrelevant because of the circumstances in which the truth table exists. Particles in steady-state physics may exist with observation because massless particles have slowed in a Higgs field to sublight speed. A Copenhagen interpretation can regard the quantum world as not existing when not observed, or irrelevant to consider unobserved. Consider the predisposition to incorrect interpretation. Waves may be the normal state and particles are inducted from them with observation temporarily, yet the wave may continue as the true normative state. The downloading to an observable particle is the anomalous breaker of the normal condition. How could it appear as if it were unobserved with characteristics of an unobserved state, of an unobserved wave? Why a pure field phenomena of energy should appear as mass with particles is a question that leads me to wonder what quantum fields should host differences within them that yield solid state mass. Laura, it occurs to me the quantum interference, like that of the double-slit experiments, might be instructive for getting answers to questions of how quantum interference occurs in the many worlds multiverse paradigm. There are issues of infinite quantum entanglements with steady states of subluminal mass in 4 dimensions comprising universe. Why shouldn't quantum interference, and even universal interference, arise to form concentrations of mass across infinite numbers of dimensions? What, Victor? Do you mean interference patterns generating transdimensional black holes? Well, not exactly, Laura. Derivatively speaking, what wind of spirit arises to trouble waters of non-space in the beginning? Why should an initial transuniversal primordial field have differences with the first cause? Perfect symmetries and balances, perfect scale, extension without point of origin, a word spoken into the darkness. Are you making the suggestion that the metaverse might not be real, Victor? In cyberspace, or a complete simulation where a quantum computer is, the universe and all sentience are digital. There can be no free will. No one could suicide, for example, unless the code was written for the sentient to do so. The boundary conditions for the simulations must be determined. The simulation can't start with a white formatted space without a program loaded in. A program could be written to evolve permutations for evolution and cycled through iterations of apparent universes, though I would think that its infinities would be loopy and its capacity for hosting dimensional capacity finite. A simulated universe would need to exist within a non-simulated universe as an epiphenomenality hosted by an absolute spirit. I don't believe at all that the metaverse is a simulation, Laura, although it could be that some kind of complex quantum interference patterns are generated by fields external to observable steady states of subluminal entangled mass within the Higgs field. Apparent observations and travel like we have made for ourselves may be macro extensions of an every possible universe kind that are localized and made to support our choices. Then the metaverse may not exist, just our observations and experiences of appearances of what it would be if it did exist because of macro field interference. There must be a positive value role for interference that is a response to our wave function data and anticipatory future inertial disposition. That might be the way it is, Laura. One cannot be certain.